Good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Sabir, the Honorary Secretary of the Society, and I'm doing the honours this evening as our President has a family member with COVID, so he's sorry he can't be here this evening. A number of guests, duly introduced by fellows, beg leave to attend your meeting. Is it your pleasure that I welcome them in your name? Thank you. Minutes.
Society of Antiquaries of London, ordinary meeting Thursday, 24th of March, 2022, at the University of Exeter and online. Professor John Hines, Vice President in the chair. The minutes of the previous ordinary meeting of Thursday, 17th of March, 2022, were read and signed. The certificates of candidates for election were laid before the Society in order to be suspended in the usual manner. The following communication was then laid before the Society. Glass beads of the Anglo-Saxons, the indigenous and the exotic, an investigation into the beads and techniques of glass bead makers in the 5th to 7th century CE by Sue Easer. Thanks were returned for this communication. The Vice President announced that the next meeting would be on Thursday, 31st of March, 2022, in Burlington House, and then adjourned the meeting.
Is it your pleasure that I sign these minutes as a true and complete record? No certificates to read out this evening. So we now come to the main business of today's meeting, which is to hear a paper, A Life in Ruins, a stonemason study of southern Britain's ancient monuments, churches and bridges by Andrew Ziminski FSA. And before I introduce our speaker properly, a little bit of housekeeping. There will be a question and answer session at the end. We'll be taking questions in the room and online, on Zoom and YouTube. If anyone would like to ask a question online, please type it in the chat function on Zoom or YouTube, and I will ask as many as I can at the end of the lecture. So Andrew Ziminski has been working as a heritage stonemason on churches, listed bridges, and archaeological sites throughout southern England and the West Country for the past 30 years. After initial training at the Weald and Downland Museum at Singleton, West Sussex, he went on to learn his craft as a trainee at Salisbury Cathedral and the masonry department at Weymouth College. He's worked on a wide range of monuments, from the earliest surviving structure in England, the West Kennet Long Barrow, to the Roman baths in Bath, and so on through countless medieval churches and cathedrals, to the monuments of the Industrial Revolution. He's a SPAB William Morris Craft Fellow, a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London, and consultant to the Salisbury Diocesan Advisory Committee for the Conservation of Stonework and Monuments. His book, The Stonemason, was published to great acclaim by John Murray's in 2020. So, A Life in Ruins, a stonemason study of southern Britain's ancient monuments, churches, and bridges. Over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
We good to go? Well, thank you. That was a seamless transition, wasn't it? I've been a stonemason for over 30 years. I've worked all over the south, west of Britain, and I mainly specialise in churches, bridges, and repairing vaults. Bit of geology, first of all. So you see this blue band that runs up through the country. So that's called the limestone belt. And that runs from the Isle of Portland. Well, some say it runs from France, really, but it runs from the Isle of Portland up through Dorset, past Bath, and up through the Cotswolds into Yorkshire. And I live in Frome in Somerset, which is really well placed and really well positioned to capitalise on the limestone buildings that need repair in our part of the world. So this is my patch. And these are the places, or some of the places that I mentioned in my book. There we are, general day for me. Notice the nylon mallet, that will come up from time to time. That gets a lot of use. So I'm going to be jumping around because the nature of my work is that I would start 1 week working to repair a bridge that's been struck by a agricultural vehicle. The next week I could be in the Roman baths, and then we'll be spending 6 months Upper Somerset Church Tower. So this isn't a chronological talk. It's a general observation of what I've learned over the years, really. So this, I'm not going to ask you what this is because you will all know and will all have visited it and will all have admired its recent conservation treatment. This is the famous Gorgon pediment in the Roman baths in Bath. And our little company, there's only 6 of us, it's called Minerva Stone Conservation. And when we established ourselves, we thought, what would be a really good logo to use for our business? So the famous Gorgon's head seemed like the right place to go. So when the opportunity came up to tender for works for this, I just had to buy the job. So we went in, put in a rock bottom price, and then learned that the work was meant to be undertaken at night, which was a bit boring. So you can see Sulis, Minerva in the middle, conflation of Roman goddess Minerva and the local deity. But, you know, he, stroke she, they, very male, what's the word? Very male in design. Beetle brow, almond shape eyes, very Celtic. But you'll notice this small node on their bridge, and that's the central point for the whole pediment where it was set out. And I only noticed that when we had the scaffolding up, and the archaeologists only noticed that at the time. So it's a very interesting start point for me in getting to know the monuments of the Roman baths. When these, this formed part of the temple pediment of the sacred, adjacent to the sacred spring in the bath. And they were rediscovered in the mid-18th century when they were rebuilding the pump room. And the Georgians, very generously to us, decided to cut the back off everything before they put it on display. So the column that you see on the left-hand side, they cut it into sections. So it's this column here, and the Corinthian capital. They cut it into sections, gouged out the inside, which allowed us to put the parts together very easily. Just 2 people could carry each section. So big thanks to the Georgians for that. But yeah, good place to work. So what was really satisfying was that we were able to reuse the original Roman fixing points to move stones around in the baths because they were redisplaying the galleries. And you'll just notice this bottom, you see this stone here, there's a little slot in the top. That's for a Lewis pin. And a Lewis pin is one of these. So you simply take them apart. The slot is wedge shaped internally. You drop the 3 sections in, screw them all together, and then you can lift it up. This is a dovetail Lewis of Roman design. We still use dovetailed Lewises to this day. We also use a different type called the split pin Lewis, which is one we're using here. So we would get our initial lift on any large stones that needed to be moved by use of the split pin, and then we would reinforce the stone with some strapping, and then move it into position using the Gantry system here. We've got 12 box tombs in the graveyard that we're due to be repairing next week, so the Gantry is going to get good use there as well. So I think if there were 2 tools that have helped pay for my mortgage over the years, it's the Gantry for heavy lifting and my nylon mallet. So there's the mallet again on the top right-hand corner. It's a completely unchanged design, really. This, the wooden one you can see lower down, that's from the ancient Egypt, from the Middle Kingdom, and the design just hasn't changed at all, really. You can still see where the beat of the mallet in the central part has slightly concave shape, and that's exactly the same with my nylon one as well, which you can see on the capital. That's in the Royal Crescent Hotel in Bath, and those volutes tend to fall off. They're on a very thin arm, and the volutes are about 2.5 feet deep. But the hotel's too tight-fisted to carve new ones, so they just want us to patch it up or pin the existing. Anyway, but our tools haven't changed at all. You know, this is my toolkit. Air chisels on the top row, and mallet assisted chisels on the bottom row. So these tools will be familiar to any stonemason from Roman times up through the medieval period and into Georgian Bath. Ways for splitting stone have remained unchanged as well. We very often get big slabs from the quarry. We generally work in Bath stone and hamstone, and we use split plugs and feathers to split the stone. So the principle here is that you drill a hole, you put in your feathers, your plugs, sorry, and then you hammer them in sequentially, and then that will split the stone. So mortars. So here's a piece of opus signinum from the Roman baths, and we had to replicate this mix for conservation repairs. So here's this is lime putty, so it's fired limestone, and to that we've added some crushed terracotta, and that acts as a pozzolana to achieve a set. So this was like a European Union standard for Roman mortar mixes throughout the empire, and no opus signinum, no bridges, no aqueducts, no viaducts. You know, it was the engineering of Rome that forced the empire along. So I really enjoy recreating old mortars. So here's a little case study. This is a chap called Cornelion, and you'll see the E and the L are conflated over that nasty fracture here. So there's you can see the horrible bit of grey cement they added, they sort of glued it together with in the 30s. So after carefully splitting it and removing the cast iron pins that were stapling the back of this together, we then just put it together with a lime mortar, and it starts to read again. So that's, you know, we do use lime mortars an awful lot in the conservation of our built heritage that we work on. So I trained at Salisbury Cathedral, and my very first job was coming out of the weather door at the top of the spire. And from there, you can look out the weather door, put your shoulder to the cobwebby door, and you can feel the top of the spire just moving around like that. It's the most extraordinary and terrifying thing. But you can see Stonehenge in the distance, Old Sarum. Now, I'm not a believer in ley lines, but it's like there's some strange alignment going on there. And then you can see Figsbury Ring in the opposite direction, just all built in a straight line. So, yeah, very lucky to have gone up there. So my very first job was at the base of the tower, sorry, the base of the spire. The spire is built on corner arches called squinches. And I became rather fascinated by them because they derive from dome architecture of Islam. So I'm always on the lookout for a good squinch. So here's the internal scaffolding. Interestingly, it doesn't actually touch the internal part of the spire at all. I think there's like a 6-inch gap around the beam ends here. So, you know, like I was saying, the spire's doing this, moving around in 360 degrees very subtly. And the wooden scaffolding inside is just not supporting it at all, but helps gain access to the top of the spire when needed, when they need to change the aircraft lights on the top. We were lucky we had a lift going up the outside, so that helped get all that materials up and tools. So I worked there 28 years ago, and last summer I went up again to see how it worked. And you can see these circular motifs that go up. I was carving these. It's called ball flowers, and they're the leitmotif of the decorated period. So it's really, there's one of mine there. There you go. But all the repairs, all the lime water work that we were undertaking is really excellent condition still after, you know, nearly 30 years of extreme attrition by the elements. So there. Also did a stint at St. Paul's, nice old-fashioned scaffolding there, which is basically a medieval Gothic building. There's internal flying buttresses that you can see there, hidden by a screen from the public. And one of my jobs was repairing this cherub's head. And the clerk of works said to me that the holes that you can see in the feathers were left to accumulate the grime of London, black sulphation. So looking from the ground, there'd be a greater contrast between light and darkness, and you could make out the detail. This head is about 1.5 meters tall. So we carefully cleaned all the black sulphation off and left some sulphation in certain areas, but the architect wasn't too keen on leaving it, so we had to take it all out. I did leave some, but didn't tell anyone. Anyway, here's a more recent job. This is at Castle Combe in Wiltshire. This is a job that we were working on just before, when lockdown occurred. So this is a medieval market cross in the middle, and in the 18th century it was enclosed by this Cotswold stone roof. When we stripped the roof, we realized that the timber frame structure was moving around in a rather alarming fashion. Many of the joints had failed, so we had to introduce loads of stainless steel bracketing to hold it all together, and new bits of oak. The stone slates are beautiful. We stripped off all 4 sides. Most of it was rubbish and went into my garden to create garden features. And the rest of it is new Cotswold stone from Gold Hill Quarry. And these are all split by hand in the quarry to suit. So that's a really, it's a job I'm particularly proud of. Andrew Jones, my friend there, he's the genius that got us through this. That's his particular area. But the medieval shaft, if you like, had been interfered with by the Victorians, and they'd put cast iron cramps to hold it all together, this top section. So the problem with cast iron, it's a poorer quality iron, so it tends to corrode and it expands within the stonework. So that's really good for us working on Victorian buildings, because we know that we're going to find some Victorian cast iron. Means profit, basically. So removing cramps, removing cement mortar, and inappropriate former repairs is basically how we earn our living. So they're all finished, all pointed up, all repaired, good for another 100 years. But we've got a strange business, really. Church work doesn't really pay much money, obviously. So we've got the contract to look after Wiltshire highways, medieval bridges, and we make money on that because it's highways, and if there's been an incident, we just have to drop what we're doing and in we go. So this is at Laycock Abbey, and there are 7 bridges around Laycock, and here you can see, the sort of honesty of our repairs. I was a William Morris Craft Fellow, so I'm very conservative in my approach. And on this bridge, we didn't really replace with new stone, apart from on weatherings. We replaced with stone slates, like you've seen on the former job, mortared in together. And that's all greened up and has worked very well. So stonemasons have to be carpenters as well, because we've got to create formwork, support vaulting. So this is a new bridge on Thames, and these ribs here generally getting knocked by hoe seasons, weekend boat people. But again, this technology is obviously very, very ancient, and you can see the use of wedges in the top to aid the uplift of the new rib sections. This section here, we actually went in the river and fished it out ourselves. It wasn't actually that deep, but these are new sections of stone there. So we use stainless steel fixings, invisible fixings. We drill holes either side, perfectly place either side of the joint, and then we pop a stainless steel dowel deep into the hole with a piece of thread around it. And then once we've got it in position, we pull the stainless steel out and it just slots into place. And then we'll fill it with lime mortar at the apex, a liquid lime mortar, and that holds it all together, generally. This is my favourite bridge. This is in Bradford on Avon, and we quite often work off a pontoon to facilitate these sort of works. This was built in about 1320. What is so interesting about this is that it's not built with lime mortar at all, it's built with clay. So you can see this section by the ladders that we've opened up. The stones are all bedded together on clay. So obviously when they were digging out for the piers, these sections of the arch, there was a surplus amount of clay to be used. And you can see that all through the bridge. Now, Bradford is really interesting that much of the adjacent architecture is clay built as well. So the Kennet and Avon Canal, which runs very close to this particular bridge, all of the structures there are clay built. And the Saxon Chapel, which I was very lucky enough to work on, when I pulled open the corner section of the North Porticus, it's just the same sort of clay that we discovered in the bridge just downstream from the chapel. So there's, using clay as a binding material has been used since the late 11th century, early 11th century, up until the 17th, 18th century. So I love that continuity and simplicity and cheapness of material that was being used there. With this, when I just knocked the clay back up, I put some water back in it. There's no point using any lime mortar or anything like that, and just squeeze the stone back in. Nice and easy. So we're going on to some churches now. So this is the United Reformed Chapel, which is built from sarsen from the Avebury henge. Not the henge, the Avebury stone circle. We've done a lot of work around Avebury, and it's always so challenging. The buildings there are absolutely sopping wet. There's no porosity in the stone, so the lime that's used to bond stones together has to be like really porous. So we use a chalk lime for that. That means it tends to fail in frosty weather. So I'm not a building surveyor, but if you're thinking of moving to Avebury or the surrounding, don't buy a sarsen house. And it rots the furniture as well. Revenge. Yeah. So is this going to work? No. Okay. Get that one. Oh, it's going to work. Look at that. That was filmed from a helicopter instead of a drone. So this is a church that the Church's Conservation Trust cares for at Luffingcott in Devon. And the problem there was that there's a problem in the West Country called wet tower syndrome, and the moisture gets in from the southwest driven prevailing wind. And because the actual building material here was really thin slates, it was a really soft mortar, and that was just allowing moisture to penetrate very easily. So the inside of the tower was absolutely sopping wet. So here we introduced a rough cast lime render that was thrown on. You can just see them doing that in a minute. And that was really good. That was very successful because it increased the surface area of the wall and obviously kept the rain out. That was a hydraulic lime. So that's a lime that's fired at a higher temperature with greater clay impurities. So it sets like a cement. Okay, here's my, so this is Fiddleton Church on the River Avon. And we received a call from the architects to say that there'd been a lightning strike on the little spire, and could we go in and just make sense of it all? So we went in, and I've seen quite a few lightning strikes over the years, and this wasn't a lightning strike, but we didn't know what had happened. So we collected the stonework back together, got the scaffolding up, started to rebuild it. This is a Chilmark stone, which Salisbury Cathedral was built from. Put it back together and put a new lightning conductor on it. But it's in a valley adjacent to the Royal Artillery live firing area. So I'm just saying, the insurance company have paid for that. But I can't help but thinking that something just took the top of that off. We do lots of work on church monuments as well. Here's some kneelers in St James's Priory in Bristol. But it's really important to record before we do anything photographically and drawn format. So this is Easter Sepulchre monument in Southpool in Devon that we had to take apart because the bottom section of the monument was actually below external ground level. So we had to encase it in a lead box, if you like, and rebuild it. So another case study. This is Hemmington Church. That we were really, really lucky during COVID, where we had this one project for the Church's Conservation Trust. So we had to repair the tower, put a new lead roof on, replaster, redecorate the interior. The things we found were so fantastic. Lovely blind tracery there, that beautiful lichen, like Chinese silk. Here's his knell with Halley's Comet, and there's a little date inscribed which matches up with the visitation of Halley's Comet in that year, 1753, I think, whatever it was. You know, so she's newly gilded it, and she's filled all the holes from shotguns and army rifles, 303 bore rifles, and we find that with all the weather vanes that we work on, that the locals, you know, love to take pot shots at them. So we just use car body filler, paint them, and gild them. But in the big storms we had a couple of 3 weeks ago, the end section of this has mysteriously, it's like a flying pigeon, has hit it, and it's turned it round at 90 degrees. So when the wind blows, it doesn't actually turn properly anymore. But it's right up high, so I don't know how they're going to fix that. They're going to have to scaffold the whole top of the tower. But I don't think the locals will notice, so it's okay, but they will. There you go. I mean, it's uncanny, isn't it? Yeah, so she needed a lovely hat. There we go, so she's got a crown. So we made her a nice hat of lead to keep the elements off, because water was pooling in her head. And we didn't really have to do much other work. You know. Very satisfying. So we put a new lead roof on, and with this sort of work, we always do a full survey of any graffiti that there may be on there. The graffiti that we found on here was quite full on, so you better brace yourself, okay? So it's not just a nice Church's Conservation Trust graffiti that we've created to celebrate the new roof. There's this fellow as well, and that's to scale. Well, that's not to scale. It's to scale on here. JM went around putting his mark all over the roof. My leadworking friend who was doing the lead work. Sorry, there's another one. They're just everywhere. My leadworking friend refused to put it back on the roof because he's got family in that graveyard, and he's burnt that particular piece of lead onto a lead flashing that's on the north side under the tower, and you wouldn't notice it if it was there. So it's nice he's carrying on these sort of slightly local. He's very local and very superstitious, so I like that. This is a piscina. This is carrying on this potrophaic approach to turning away evil, and that is because this drainage hole, so piscinas, so the incumbent could wash their hands, and the water would go down the drain, and the drain was full of broken shards of glass that were probably smashed during the Civil War, and pins and screws and nails. Love to know what they were trying to keep out. I mean, yeah, my friend Pete thought it'd be a good idea to just have a fish around and see what was going on. So I don't really know what this is about. There's a more recent token here. See this little golden, that's Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it's just a little plastic token that someone's shoved in this hole to who understood the importance of that. So here's another case study, jumping around as I do in my job. This is at Hornstow in Dorset. This isn't really, there isn't a place called Hornstow. So it's a Thomas Hardy short story is based there. But this is an insurance claim. And the insurance claim is for one thing, but there was something else caused this collapse. So I've got to be a bit careful. So there was a mother and toddlers group taking place inside when this window blew out in a terrible storm. Nothing to do with the Royal Artillery. But fortunately, the tracery and the glazing fell outwards instead of in. So we were called in to prop what was left. So it's what you call a rose window. Prop what was left, and it's our formwork, because masons have to be carpenters as well. There was quite a lot of original rose window left in that we could reuse. But all the mullions, the legs, if you like, that go up to support the rose itself, had to be carved new. You can see the little holes there for our stainless steel dowels, just to lock everything together. The glazing line's been cut for the stained glass. There's the bottom section. So the mullions were coming up to this part here. New parts of rose, and there it is back in position. But what had happened was that beneath these window lights here, they'd put an I-beam in. A builder who didn't understand how old buildings worked put a new I-beam in without the input of an engineer, and some new screen glass doors, and the whole of this window just dropped 2 or 3 millimeters, and 3 months later it fell out. So yeah, hence the insurance question mark. So okay, nearing the end. So this is a fairly typical project in Bath. This is Manolo Blahnik's house, who's a shoe designer in Sex in the City. I've got some Manolos. And Bath, the limestone in Bath is anywhere else would be really durable, but because of the poor quality of coal that was burnt in the sun, that was extracted from the Somerset collieries, it's really caused great damage to the city's architecture. So you can see severely smoke-blackened Corinthian capitals on the left-hand side. And that's what damages the limestone. So we had to cut and create new volute scrolls and undertake lime mortar repairs, because we tried to save as much original material as possible. So it's dentistry on a massive scale, really. So you can see the lime mortar repairs to the top of these little acanthus leaves here. So we've taken out the sulfation by poulticing. So you basically put a paper pulp over the stonework. That draws the salt out that's causing the damage. Introduce some lime mortar repairs and some new carved elements where necessary. So it all looks pretty good there. So this isn't work. This is just a hobby project. So this is the Lichfield Angel that was discovered in beneath the nave of Lichfield Cathedral in 2003 or 4. It's an Ancaster limestone figure that's about that high. It's the Archangel Gabriel, and it's forms one half of an Annunciation scene. And I'm absolutely fascinated by early medieval sculpture, but this is of a different order altogether. So I've been trying to figure out how he accompanied the image of the Virgin, whether she was depicted standing or sitting, And I've really enjoyed this process. So I've got a new piece of stone, cutting this house-shaped shrine, just to see how the stone works, try and figure out what tools were used, just get into the mindset of the artist that created this. This wasn't created by an Anglo-Saxon. This was created by someone who had been schooled in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I love the fact that he's been lured, or he or she have been lured to damp old Lichfield to work for King Offa from that part of the world. This formed one end, they think it formed one end of the shrine of St. Chad. And there it is, that's just where I am today. So I'm getting there. You know, when I've got a bit of spare time, I just do a bit more. But, there you go, buy my book. It's the #1 bestseller. Thank you.
Got some in the room to start with.
Great.
Yep, got one right away. Just wait till they get organised.
Oh, very interesting. Have you ever worked with marble at all? Proper
No.
marble? No.
No, the only time I've worked with marble was in the Roman baths, and they've got one in the Roman baths in Bath. They've only found one piece of Carrara marble, and it's I've conserved it. And at college, I worked to carve marble, but there's a whole, you know, if you're being a stonemason, you've got to specialise. So you specialise in letter cutting. Conservation is my thing. We had an apprentice a couple of years ago, and she's completed her job, and she's now doing a marble carving course in northern Italy, and she's got a job, and they're paying her more than we paid her. So,
Okay. And the Carrara piece is an original Roman piece.
It's an original Roman piece. It's only so big. It's just an inscription, but it's really thin. It's really interesting how, obviously, they're not going to want to transport a larger piece of marble from that part of the world.
Just a quick thought on your obscene signs on the top of the church. You probably know this, you're an expert, but Hadrian's Wall and other Roman monuments have these signs on, and they don't mean something pornographic. They're something meant a good luck symbol. Yeah. And it might be somebody being, at first sight, I thought it was somebody being, desecrating God's holy house, but I think it's actually an old tradition goes back where stonemasons gave a good luck symbol and put it up. It's just a thought. Yeah. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a lead worker that did that, not a stonemason or a local resident.
That's it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any sort of fixative that could be applied to arrest the effects of acid rain? Or once it sets in, it's irreversible?
You can reverse it by poulticing. So if you have a limestone building that has a black crust on it, black sulfation crust, you can apply, as I said earlier, a paper pulp poultice with a certain chemical in it, and that will reverse and draw out the salts, and it works a treat. But there's nothing you can apply that will. It's just old-fashioned elbow grease and hard work.
Thank you. I'd like to say, first of all, how much I enjoyed your book, which brought me here tonight, of course.
Oh, great.
But the book's very much about what you might describe as the numinousness of these sites you've been working on, particularly the prehistoric sites, where you start in the book. And today we had fascinating survey of technique and materials and problems. What the question I want to ask you, which is why I bought the book in the first place, is what draws you to stone in the first place, and what keeps you working with stone? I know you said you were a carpenter, but actually, you're a stone carver, and I want to know a bit more about what makes you so committed to this particular medium.
Well, thank you very much. It's really, really great to hear that you love my book. Terrific. #1 bestseller. When my father came over during the war, it's a long story, this is better sit down. Father came over, he was working, the war finished, he couldn't go back to Poland, so he was working on hydroelectric schemes in Scotland. So he was a tunnel tiger, he was in charge of explosives and tunneling through these mountains. But his friends were getting killed. They were just getting killed all the time. So he wanted an easier job. So his foreman said, why don't you become a stonemason? So he worked as a granite stonemason to create the outflow, the sort of mouth outflows of these hydroelectric tunnels. And when we used to go up to Scotland, I used to like the permanency. You know, Dad would say, son, this will last 1 million years. And he's, you know, probably will last 10 million years, you know. So I love the permanency of that. I'm a frustrated archaeologist. I was rubbish at school. So doing something practical that satisfied my interest in the past just seemed right for me. And when I started at the Wealden Downland Museum, they just said, right, off you go and build a medieval house with Mick the Mason. And that was that. So it's just, you know, someone up there has been helping me along the way, you know, all of my life. So thank you.
What is the worst type of standard repair in historical times that you encounter frequently?
Does it have to be a repair or
modification, alteration, or repair?
Yeah. So as we know, the Victorians are responsible for saving lots of churches, but they're also responsible for the vandalism of lots of churches as well. And towards the end of the Victorian period, the materials they were using were not as good. So they were starting to use some basic cements, which had a detrimental effect. They were using cast iron instead of wrought iron. And it's unpicking Victorian repairs that have, as I say, paid my mortgage for some years. So it's taking what were perceived to be wonder materials at the time and reversing them. So we try and keep the stonework that they've repaired or replaced, but the cement pointing, the cement grouting, that's adding a volume of cement behind the scenes. That's difficult to unpick. But the Packhorse Bridge in Bradford on Avon, I mean, the joy of that was that it's never had vehicular traffic on it. It's just been a footbridge. So it's, as I said, it's full of clay. The stonework is original. It's not had any salt thrown on it for pedestrians. It's, you know, it's a perfect, you know, it's almost as good today as it was when it was finished in 1330. So, you know, I love that, but that's quite rare. I think road salt is the biggest problem we have with old buildings because it rots the base of buildings. So there you go. There's 3 things.
The problem with cement is it's not just the Victorians. It's still ongoing today. So many builders throw cement at historic buildings, and it's just continuing through ignorance. Yeah,
it's worse in certain parts of the country. I mean, in the West Country, it was, you know, you can't leave your front door without bumping into someone who knows about lime or
yeah.
You know,
well, you're lucky.
Yeah, well, it's, yeah, in certain, I'm not going to say certain parts of the country are uninformed.
No, it really is a big problem and still is. Yeah.
Thanks. This sort of leads on from one we've had before, Andrew, and you've obviously got this amazing affinity with stone. But do you think enough is being done to nurture the next generation of skilled people to do all this work?
Thinking regionally, in my part of the world, yes, there are no shortage of people going through college, being churned out by the system, and then they get their MVQ, and then they make a choice as to whether they want to specialise in, I don't know, sculpture, letter cutting. You can't mix everything, really. You've got to choose to specialise. So there's no problem in our part of the world. There's no problem in Scotland either. Other regions are less blessed, but like I said at the beginning of my talk, I work up and down the limestone belt, and that's reflected in where the colleges are. So Portland and Bath are the best places to learn.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay. Anyone else in the room?
Thanks very much. A fascinating lecture. I've been told about limestone buildings, thinking of one in London, that it could not be cleaned. That's one thing. And another unrelated question, if you could. Have you come across cases where a building has a crust on it, which it would be unwise to disturb? Two things, please.
Two good questions there. Thank you. Is it the Reform Club?
No, that's St George Bloomsbury was first. St George Bloomsbury is limestone building, and it was said that it could not be cleaned.
Okay.
And it would always have to remain rather grubby.
That's I think that's a Portland stone building, which which you can clean. St Paul's Cathedral in the image of the cherub that we saw. That's yes. There's no problem with cleaning that. But with cleaning, you have to be really careful to not disturb the crust, as you're suggesting. So if you overclean, you open the pores of the surface of the stone, and then the pollution gets in, and you have all sorts of problems. So you've got to be really gentle and not overclean. Just keep it so. Cleaning's best left to a professional. Yeah. Thank you.
This person starts off by thanking you for your talk and goes on to say, I realise that you are conserving, not changing, but how difficult is it to work with or around lead with conserving roofs or other areas that required lead?
The lead roof at Hemmington Church with graffiti on it had been led down in 1746, I think. So, but it was really starting to deteriorate. So the original lead was melted down. All of the graffiti was, lots of handprints as well as other ones. Those are footprints, outlines of shoes. I've worked on a church where there's a full outline of a person. Every old church roof will have just so much graffiti on it. So that is always cut out, and we've put much of it back in the position it was discovered. But if that's not been possible, we'll put some old lead. We will always keep some lead sheets, especially if they've got footprints and signatures and that sort of thing. And at Hemmington, they're on display in the ringing chamber. So it is challenging working with lead, but it's also satisfying that the same lead has gone back on, but it's just been melted down. I mean, in the Roman baths, in Bath, in one of the images that I showed you, where the slot was in the top of the stone, the lining of the baths is the original Roman lead. It's 4 inches thick. And these, you know, these sheets are enormous, but this lead came from the Mendip Hills. So that's, yeah, I find that ever so, that's one of those thrilling things in Britain, that the original lead is there, you know.
This person's now followed up with how poisonous is it to work with the lead?
You have to have a test regularly. And it's not so much the lead, it's the lead carbon, for want of a better word, the name of it escapes me. But there's like this white powder that forms underneath lead, and that that is quite poisonous. So yeah.
And now I've got a question here saying, can you say a bit more about ancient mortars? How do you find out about the materials, etc.?
How did I find out about, or how does one?
It just says, it doesn't specify.
Okay.
So either one, you pick.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a jeweler's lens. I can pick up a piece of. I went to Fiddleton Church, which is a fine Saxon church in Sussex the other day, and a piece of mortar had fallen out and it's, you know, it's Saxon mortar. Saxons lost the use of working with Romanized mortar. There's very little, I think there is one church that escapes me, but not in our part of the world, that uses crushed terracotta as a pozzolana to achieve a set. But this mortar sample at Fiddleton Church that I've got as part of my collection in the Ziminskian is just ordinary lime mortar. So that's lime, that's limestone or chalk that's been fired in a kiln to a temperature of less than 900 degrees. And to that is added the local aggregate, whatever it is. You can see that the aggregate in this Anglo-Saxon mortar sample that I've got has just come out of the local river. It's very small particulate. There's no sand in it, it's just mortar and a certain size of aggregate from the river. So builders are like farmers. Builders back in the day were like farmers, you know, like working with the clay to build bridges and churches. You know, they knew where to farm the land to get their building materials. And I get too excited about that. I think that answered the question, didn't it?
Thank you. Thank you for a fascinating talk. Do you have problems sourcing the correct types of stone? Are there enough active quarries in the Jurassic Cretaceous limestone belt?
In my part of the world, we're really, really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no problem at all. Ham Hill Quarry is still producing top quality stone near Yeovil. There are several mines around Bath that are still good. Portland, of course, still a very much an open cast quarry. But very often, you know, sometimes we do go and open an old quarry, or just go and dig it, you know, go and dig a delve, which is a hole in a field, and get to something that's specific, which we've had to do on a few occasions. There's always a way.
Well, can I thank you once again, Andrew? That was absolutely fascinating, and all the range of projects that you've been involved in. That's been fantastic. So can we thank Andrew again in the traditional way? And can I just give notice that the next meeting will be online only. That's next Thursday, the 7th of April at 5 o'clock, when we'll hear a paper, William Bowyer's Heroica Elogia of 1567, an illuminated history of the Earls of Leicester from the Tower Records by Professor Norman Jones FSA. And can I just remind everyone that the spring event program is live on our website, and bookings are open. All our events are free and open to anyone. And there's lunchtime lectures as well as the evening lectures. Thank you very much for coming. The meeting stands adjourned, and please join us for a drink outside.